The church was packed to capacity. Every seat filled. Every aisle tight with anticipation. Cameras were rolling, red lights blinking softly as producers whispered countdowns through headsets. The massive screens behind the stage glowed with warm colors and scripture verses, setting the mood for another flawless Sunday service. Joel Osteen stood just off stage, adjusting his microphone, smiling as applause began to rise. This was his world, orderly, polished, perfectly timed. Nothing unexpected ever slipped through the cracks. Then something did. Near the back of the sanctuary, standing quietly between rows of people, was a man who didn't belong, at least, not according to appearances. Jeans. A plain, slightly worn shirt. No assistant. No security detail. No VIP badge. He wasn't looking around in awe. He wasn't filming. He wasn't trying to be noticed. He was just standing there, calm, still, almost invisible. But something about him pulled attention like gravity. Joel's smile faltered for half a second. He leaned slightly toward his head of security and whispered, his voice firm but low. "Who let him in?" Security followed Joel's gaze. Their posture changed instantly. In a place built on peace, tension quietly took its seat. Two guards began moving down the aisle, eyes locked on the man. People nearby shifted uncomfortably, sensing something was wrong. Whispers spread like ripples across water. "Is he lost? Did something happen? Why are they going toward him?" The man noticed them approaching and turned slowly. His expression didn't change. No panic. No anger. Just steady eyes and a calm breath, as if he had been expecting this moment. Security stopped in front of him. "Sir," one of them said quietly, "you'll need to come with us." The man nodded slightly, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. That's when a woman too rose away, gasped softly. A man further down leaned forward, squinting. Someone whispered a name under their breath, barely loud enough to hear. "No way. Is that? It can't be." Joel, watching from near the stage, felt a strange unease crawl up his spine. The face seemed familiar now, too familiar, like a memory he couldn't quite place. As the guards reached for the man's arm, he finally spoke. His voice was calm, deep, controlled. "There's no need for force," he said gently. And in that moment, before anyone said his name, before the truth came out, before the room exploded into realization, security was seconds away from removing Chuck Norris. A decision made in silence. A mistake born from assumption. And what happened next would leave the entire church stunned. Lakewood Church was buzzing that Sunday morning in a way only a televised service could be. From the outside, the massive building looked calm and welcoming, but inside it pulsed with energy. Thousands of people filled the seats, voices blending into a steady hum of conversation and excitement. Volunteers guided families down aisles. Ushers smiled on cue. Cameramen adjusted angles, making sure every shot looked flawless for the millions watching from home. This wasn't just a church service. It was a production. Joel Osteen had built his ministry on positivity, order, and inspiration. Every detail mattered. Lighting had to be perfect. Sound levels carefully balanced. No interruptions. No surprises. When people tuned in, they expected peace, confidence, and control, and Joel was determined to deliver exactly that. That's why the man near the back stood out so sharply. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't loud. He wasn't disruptive. But he didn't fit. He stood calmly, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes focused toward the stage. No phone. No camera. No attempt to blend in or draw attention. His clothes were simple, jeans, a plain shirt, nothing expensive or flashy. In a place filled with well-dressed guests and clearly marked VIPs, his presence felt undefined. Joel noticed again. From the corner of his eye, the man seemed too close to the main aisle, too near the sightlines of the cameras. Joel's jaw tightened slightly. In live broadcasts, almost perfect wasn't good enough. He signaled security once more. Security moved with purpose, trained to handle situations before they became problems. Two guards approached the man, their expressions polite but firm. "Sir," one of them said quietly, You'll need to step away. This area is restricted. The man turned to face them. His movements were slow, deliberate, respectful. He didn't look confused. He didn't look offended. He smiled. "I'm just here to listen," he replied calmly. No attitude. No argument. No raised voice. That answer unsettled them more than resistance would have. Around them, people began to notice. Conversations faded. Heads turned. A few phones lifted discreetly. Something about the exchange felt off, not dangerous, but uncomfortable, like a moment that didn't belong in a place built on serenity. The guards exchanged a quick glance. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us," one said again, slightly firmer this time. The man nodded once, as if he understood their position. Still calm. Still unbothered. That's when murmurs spread. "Why are they stopping him? He doesn't look like trouble. Did he do something?" A woman in the row behind him frowned, sensing injustice without fully understanding why. An older man near the aisle leaned forward, studying the stranger's face more closely, his brow slowly furrowing. Joel watched it all from near the stage. Something didn't sit right. The man's posture wasn't defensive. His eyes weren't fearful. There was a quiet confidence about him that didn't ask for space, it commanded it. Before we continue, backhand index pointing right, comment below where you're watching from, globe showing Europe, Africa. And like this video if you respect people who stay calm under disrespect and never raise their voice. Folded hands. The guards were seconds away from escorting him out. No one in that massive room yet realized who he truly was. But they were about to. And once the truth surfaced, the meaning of judgment inside that church would never feel the same again. Security grabbed his arm. It wasn't rough, but it was firm enough to send a signal. This was no longer a request. That single touch changed the atmosphere instantly. The low hum of conversation collapsed into stunned silence. Every nearby movement froze. People who had been half paying attention suddenly leaned forward, eyes wide, drawn into the moment as if something invisible had snapped tight in the air. That's when the whispers began. "Wait, isn't that? No way. It can't be." The man slowly turned his head, not toward the guards, but toward the people around him. He didn't pull away. He didn't tense up. He simply stood, unhurried, controlled, as though time moved differently for him. Then he rose to his feet. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't aggressive. But it was deliberate. With one smooth motion, he straightened to his full height, towering just enough to make the guards instinctively adjust their stance. His presence shifted the balance of the room. Suddenly, the guards didn't look like authority figures anymore. They looked like men who had just stepped into something far bigger than they expected. "No need to touch," he said softly. His voice wasn't loud, yet it carried. Calm. Grounded. Final. The guard's hand loosened without conscious thought. People in the surrounding rows stared openly now. A woman covered her mouth. A teenager nudged his father urgently, whispering again, louder this time, "Dad, that looks like..." The second guard frowned, studying the man's face more closely. The clean jawline. The unmistakable eyes. The quiet intensity that didn't fade under pressure. Across the room, Joel Osteen glanced up again. And this time, something hit him. A flash of recognition, sharp and unsettling. That face felt familiar. Too familiar. Not in the way you recognize a regular church member, but in the way you recognize someone you've seen for decades without ever meeting. Joel's smile vanished completely. He leaned forward slightly, squinting past the lights, past the cameras, past the heads of the congregation. His heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the creeping realization that he might have made a serious mistake. The guards hesitated. "Sir," one of them said, less confident now, "we're just following instructions." The man nodded once. "I understand." That response only deepened the tension. Someone near the aisle finally said it out loud. "Is that Chuck Norris?" The name didn't echo. It detonated. A wave of disbelief rippled across the sanctuary. Heads snapped toward the man. Gasps followed. Phones rose higher. Even the cameraman faltered, one of them slowly panning in without realizing he was doing it. No, that's impossible. He wouldn't just walk in like that. Why would he be back there? But the more people looked, the harder it became to deny. The eyes. The calm. The unmistakable presence of a man who had spent a lifetime commanding respect without asking for it. Joel's throat went dry. He knew that face. Movie screens. Interviews. Charity events he'd heard about but never attended. Chuck Norris. And Joel realized something terrifying in that instant. This wasn't a man seeking attention. This was a man who had intentionally avoided it. Security stepped back half a step, uncertainty spreading across their faces. They looked toward the stage for confirmation, for direction, for anything. Joel didn't move. For the first time that morning, the service schedule meant nothing. The cameras kept rolling, capturing a moment that couldn't be scripted. Chuck Norris looked around the room calmly, then back at the guards. "I came to listen," he said again. Nothing more. The simplicity of the statement cut deeper than any accusation. Joel felt the weight of every assumption he had made, about appearance, about status, about who belonged where. The room held its breath. A decision had been made too quickly. A judgment passed too easily. And now, there was no way to take back the moment security grabbed Chuck Norris's arm. The conflict wasn't loud. It was worse. It was silent, public, and unfolding live in front of thousands. A test of humility that no one, especially Joel, had seen coming. An elderly volunteer stepped forward, her hands trembling so badly she had to clasp them together to keep them steady. She had been standing near the aisle for years, long before the cameras, long before the crowds, long before the church became a global stage. She wasn't used to interrupting anything, especially not a service this large. But something in her chest told her she had to speak. "Sir," her voice quivered as she addressed the head of security, "do you know who that is?" Her words cut through the silence like a thin blade. Security froze. The two guards turned toward her, confused. One of them started to respond, then stopped. The uncertainty on their faces deepened, spreading like a crack in glass. Joel Osteen squinted from the stage. Not the polite squint of a man trying to see better, but the focused stare of someone re-examining a mistake. He looked again at the man standing in the aisle. This time, he didn't see a disruption. He saw details. The way the man stood, balanced, grounded, as if his feet were rooted to the floor. The way his shoulders were relaxed, not slouched, not stiff. The way he didn't shift under pressure, didn't glance around for support or approval. Joel's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. Then it hit him. Not all at once, but in fragments. The walk. Slow. Measured. Purposeful. The presence. Quiet, but overwhelming. Not demanding attention, yet impossible to ignore. And the eyes. Eyes that didn't search the room. Eyes that had already seen worse than judgment. Eyes that looked like they had seen 1,000 battles, and survived every one of them. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of a sermon pause. The heavy silence of realization. Somewhere near the front, a microphone picked up the faint sound of someone inhaling sharply. A camera operator stopped adjusting focus, hands frozen mid-motion. The massive screens behind the stage still glowed, but now they felt intrusive, as if they were witnessing something too personal to broadcast. The elderly volunteer took another step forward, her voice stronger now, steadier. "He's not a problem," she said. "He's a guest." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Security shifted their weight, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. Their training told them to control the situation, but their instincts were telling them something else entirely. This man was not a threat. He never had been. Joel swallowed. Memories rushed in, interviews he'd seen years ago, news clips, stories about quiet generosity and unpublicized donations. Stories about a man who avoided stages and spotlights, choosing action over applause. How had he missed it? The man's face was clearer now. Undeniable. The jawline. The calm, disciplined stillness. The unmistakable look of someone who had spent a lifetime being tested, and passing those tests without needing to announce it. A security supervisor whispered urgently into his radio, "Hold position." No one moved. Not the guards. Not Chuck Norris. Not Joel. Time seemed to stretch, the moment growing heavier with every passing second. Chuck finally glanced toward the elderly volunteer and gave her a small nod. A simple gesture, but one filled with gratitude and respect. No words were exchanged. That gesture alone spoke volumes. Joel felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just about recognizing a celebrity anymore. This was about recognizing character. The cameras were still rolling. The congregation was watching. Millions at home were watching too, though they didn't yet understand why their screens suddenly felt so tense. Joel took a step forward, then stopped. He wasn't ready yet. Because in that silence, one truth had become impossible to ignore. This man didn't need protection. He didn't need permission. And he certainly didn't need to prove who he was. Everyone else in that room, however, was about to be tested. The tension wasn't explosive. It was suffocating. And in that silence, that unbearable, humbling silence, the stage was set for a revelation that would change the meaning of respect inside that church forever. Joel, that's Chuck Norris. The words didn't echo through the church. They hit it. Like thunder crashing inside a place built for calm, the name ripped through the silence and changed the air instantly. Gasps followed, sharp, uncontrollable. People straightened in their seats. Phones rose without hesitation now. A few mouths fell open, disbelief written across faces that had moments ago been confused. Chuck Norris. Not a rumor. Not a guess. Not a joke. The man standing quietly in the aisle didn't react. He didn't smile wider. He didn't correct anyone. He simply stood there, hands relaxed, eyes steady, as if the name belonged to the past, not to him. Joel Osteen felt the blood drain from his face. For a brief moment, the stage lights felt too bright. The massive screens behind him suddenly felt unforgiving, magnifying not just images, but mistakes. His mind raced backward through every second since he'd noticed the man. The whisper to security. The assumption. The order. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just any guest. This was the same Chuck Norris who had quietly funded disaster relief efforts when cameras weren't rolling. The same man who had donated millions to veterans' families without press releases. The same man who avoided red carpets, interviews, and applause, choosing impact over image. And Joel had nearly had him escorted out. Security stepped back fully now, hands dropping to their sides. Their authority dissolved into humility as recognition settled in. One of the guards swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the floor. The congregation buzzed with stunned energy. That's really him. I can't believe it. He didn't even say anything. Chuck Norris finally spoke, not to the crowd, not to the cameras, but calmly, to the room itself. I didn't come as a celebrity, he said, his voice steady and unassuming. I came as a believer. The simplicity of the sentence carried more weight than a sermon. No accusation. No bitterness. No demand for apology. Just truth. Joel stepped down from the stage slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last. He looked at Chuck, not as a famous figure now, but as a man who had just exposed something uncomfortable and real. Judgment. Joel opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. For the first time, he realized this moment wasn't about him controlling the narrative. It was about what came next. The cameras were still rolling. The world was watching. The congregation waited, holding their breath. Chuck met Joel's eyes. There was no anger there. No pride. Only calm, earned, not claimed. The silence stretched. And that's where the real question emerged. Not just for Joel, but for everyone watching. Backhand index pointing right, what would you do next? Would you apologize, admit the mistake, and grow from it? Or would you double down, protect your ego, and pretend nothing happened? Backhand index pointing right comment below. Apologize or double down. Let's see what you choose. Joel's face showed it all now. The conflict, the humility forming, the understanding that respect isn't about status, titles, or appearances. It's about how you treat people before you know who they are. Chuck Norris hadn't come to make a scene. He hadn't come to test anyone. But the test had happened anyway. And it revealed more than anyone expected. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe for more powerful, untold moments like this. stories that remind us character always speaks louder than fame. Well, because sometimes the greatest lesson walks in quietly and waits to see how you'll respond. Joel stepped down from the stage. Not with the confident stride he usually carried, but slowly, deliberately, like a man who understood the weight of the moment. The cameras followed him, but for once, he didn't seem aware of them. His attention was fixed on one person alone. Chuck Norris. The crowd watched in absolute silence as Joel stopped just a few feet from him. No music played. No cue cards guided the moment. This wasn't planned. And that's what made it powerful. Joel took a breath. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice clear enough to reach the farthest row. "I judged before I understood." There was no excuse attached. No justification. No attempt to soften the truth. Just accountability. A wave of emotion moved through the congregation. Some people nodded slowly. Others felt a tightening in their chest, because they recognized themselves in that admission more than they wanted to admit. Chuck Norris looked at Joel for a moment. Not to measure him. Not to embarrass him. But to see if the apology was real. Then Chuck extended his hand. Joel took it without hesitation. Chuck's grip was firm, steady, not dominant, not performative. He smiled slightly and said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Happens to all of us. What matters is what we do after." The words landed softly, but they stayed. Joel lowered his head for a brief second, not in shame, but in respect. Security stood back now, their earlier authority replaced by quiet humility. One of the guards exhaled deeply, relief written across his face. Another nodded subtly, as if acknowledging a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. The elderly volunteer wiped her eyes. Someone near the front began to clap. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire church erupted in applause. Not the wild applause reserved for celebrities. Not the rehearsed applause prompted by music. This was different. This was recognition. Recognition of a moment where pride had been set aside. Recognition of a mistake owned publicly. Recognition of grace offered without conditions. The applause rolled on, louder and longer than anyone expected. Chuck Norris raised his hand slightly, not to accept praise, but to quiet the room. The clapping faded, though the energy remained thick in the air. He turned toward the congregation. "I came here today to be fed spiritually," he said calmly. "Not to be seen. Not to be treated differently. Just to sit, listen, and learn, like everyone else." People listened with rapt attention. "When we forget that," he continued, "we forget why we're here in the first place." Joel nodded slowly. The cameras captured his expression, not polished, not rehearsed, but genuine. He gestured toward the seat nearest the aisle. "Please," Joel said, "sit wherever you're comfortable." Chuck smiled again and shook his head gently. "I'm fine right here." And he meant it. That response sealed the moment. No VIP seat. No special treatment. No spotlight. Just equality. Joel returned to the stage, but something had changed. His posture was different. His tone softer. When he spoke again, it wasn't from a place of authority, it was from understanding. "We all make assumptions," Joel said to the congregation. "And sometimes, those assumptions say more about us than the people we judge." Heads nodded across the room. People felt seen. Corrected. Humbled. The service continued, but it wasn't the same service anymore. It had become a lesson. Not about Chuck Norris. Not even about Joel Osteen. But about how quickly we decide who belongs, and how rarely we stop to question ourselves. The applause that followed wasn't for fame. It wasn't for power. It was for humility. And everyone inside that church knew they had witnessed something rare. A moment where grace spoke louder than status. And respect mattered more than recognition. Chuck Norris never needed respect. He already carried it. He didn't demand it. He didn't announce it. He didn't walk in expecting special treatment. It followed him quietly, earned through decades of discipline, restraint, and character when no one was watching. That day inside the church wasn't about fame being recognized. It was about humility being revealed. Because real strength doesn't shout. It doesn't posture. And it certainly doesn't need a spotlight. Real strength is standing calm when misunderstood. Real strength is choosing grace when ego would be easier. Real strength is knowing who you are, without needing anyone else to confirm it. Chuck Norris could have spoken up the moment security approached. He could have said his name. He could have demanded respect. But he didn't. And that silence spoke louder than any title ever could. The lesson isn't about Joel Osteen. It isn't about security. And it isn't even about Chuck Norris. It's about us. How often do we judge by appearance? How often do we decide who belongs before hearing their story? How often do we confuse authority with wisdom, or loudness with power? That moment reminded everyone watching of a simple truth. You never really know who someone is, until you see how they act when they don't have to prove it. True faith doesn't look for attention. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't require applause. It shows up quietly. It listens more than it speaks. And it treats everyone the same, before knowing their worth in the world's eyes. That's why this moment stayed with people long after the service ended. Because humility isn't weakness. It's strength under control. And respect isn't something you demand from others. It's something you live, even when you're overlooked. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe humility is true power, type respect in the comments. Thumbs up like this video if you believe character matters more than status. Bell subscribe for more real-life lessons that don't just entertain, but challenge the heart. Stories like this remind us that the most powerful people in the room are often the quietest ones. And before you go, backhand index pointing right, tell me where you're watching from. Globe showing Europe, Africa. Because kindness has no borders, and I want to thank every one of you who still believes respect comes first. Folded hands. Remember this. The world may reward noise, but life always honors character. And sometimes, the greatest lessons walk in quietly, and leave you changed forever.